So I thought I'd make a quick video on the subject of marriage for no reason in particular. I'm single. I'm now 46. I'm pretty happy being single. I suppose there's an element of loneliness there. But overall, I think I escaped a great trap. That's the way I look at it. Because there are so many marriages that are either unhappy or that ended in divorce. It's curious that, isn't it? When we're so attached to the marriage institution as the correct way to go about male-female relationships. Anyway, let me take you through the essential reason why I am personally against marriage for myself. If you're married and it's been working long term and you're happy, good for you. I have nothing against that. You lucked out. So you have no reason to be offended by anything I'm going to say here. But if you're married long term and you're unhappy, well, you don't have to be offended either, because you'll basically recognize what I'm saying as essentially true. And if you're not married but contemplating it, be careful. Okay? Here's how things generally go. You're in a relationship, let's say, and you're both very much in love. So one of them, let's say the man in this case, but of course it can be the woman. The man says, "Will you marry me?" Now what he's essentially saying is, he's saying to himself that I think what we have together, the kind of love we have, is something that will last forever. So let's formalize it. Let's go through a day where we announce to the world that we are staying together forever. First of all, why do you need to announce it to anybody? Does it have anything to do with anybody else? No. It's you and your relationship together, right? So there's no real need for it in that sense. But I suppose it's your way of telling your partner that I'm in this for the long haul. I want to be together till death do us part. That is the amount of value that I place in you, right? And that's a positive thing. But again, what would happen if you didn't marry? Now let's say your love really was of that very high caliber, that it can stand the test of an entire lifetime. What's going to happen if you choose not to marry? Well, you're just going to end up staying together forever. So the same thing is going to happen whether you marry or you don't, assuming that your love is of that caliber, right? And it can be. Some marriages last forever and they are happy. It can happen. So again, why is marriage necessary? Because if your relationship stands the test of time, then it simply stands the test of time. Do you see? Marriage is unnecessary. But here's the dark side of this equation. Here's the danger. If you formalize it and you go through a legal process and you become married, then you enter into a situation of ownership, a contractual obligation to stay together, right? That means something that was given and received freely now becomes an obligation. But if it's an obligation, that changes the quality of the relationship. Well, I'm trying to find the right words to express this. Let me put it this way. Your love is only worth something when it's given and received freely. What is it actually worth if it's coerced? If it's held together by a legal bind? Do you see what I'm saying? Because your marriage is only going to be happy if the love is given and received freely. So why would you want to enter into a situation where you get to keep the other person even if they've decided they don't want to stay at some point in the future? You see? is it worth it if they're only there because you're forcing them to be there? This is the dark side of marriage. Now, I also understand that children complicates this whole thing, because marriage does provide stability for any children that are born into the relationship. But again, that's kind of like saying, as long as you marry, there'll never be such a thing as a deadbeat dad. I mean, you could have an unmarried couple who raise a couple of kids where both the man and the woman are fully committed to those kids, and the kids have a great life and grow up well adjusted. And then you can have two people who are married, but it's a deadbeat dad. Or of course a deadbeat mother. You could have that too, couldn't you? Marriage is no guarantee of a healthy relationship between the man and the woman, or between the man or the woman and the kids. It really isn't. I do remember one time in my growing up, I think I was about 11 years old, where my dad threatened divorce while my mom and dad were having this big heated argument. And it terrified me. I remember going upstairs and turning on my computer and trying to just sort of disappear into a video game for an hour. But it really terrified me. But it didn't happen. They stayed together, but they were, for the most part, a fairly unhappy couple for most of my life. People can, as long as you're a reasonably moral human being, if you're with a person and the two of you produce a child together, let's say the situation is unmarried, you produce a child together, well, you are binding yourselves to each other through that child for almost a couple of decades. Okay? That is the facts of the matter. So if I got a girl pregnant, I would have to take responsibility for that. Now, that may involve us staying together as a couple, but if that doesn't work, is that necessarily healthy for the child? Would it not be better to live in separate houses and both people to take responsibility for the child at different times? This is how things tend to work these days. But just in everything that I'm saying, I just don't see why marriage is a necessity or why it's even desirable. And I suppose I should say a little something about how men are particularly afraid of marriage, because when things go wrong, if things go wrong, the legal system favors the female much, much more than the male. And it's not that the man shouldn't, of course, support the child that he created, but you know what I'm saying here. There is definitely a double standard here when it comes to male-female equality in the court system regarding families. So you could take the overall attitude to marriage of simply throwing caution to the wind and saying, no, we're going to last forever. I don't think I could do that. And I think I have a more realistic appraisal of human nature than most people. I don't see monogamy as a completely natural thing for a human being. I'm basing that on my own research, particularly a really good book that you should read called Sex at Dawn by Christopher Ryan. It takes you right back to the prehistoric period and makes some very intelligent speculation about how men and women related to each other in that time period, when we were hunter-gatherers, when we were living in small groups of 50 or 60 people. It would have been polyamorous in nature. It would have been free love, if you like. It was not pair bonding in the sense that we understand pair bonding. You see, when I can fall in love with a female the same as anybody can, and I have done. But I understand that process not as something wonderful and almost spiritual that's happening to me. It's a chemical thing happening in my brain where this body is essentially going, come on, we got to make more humans, make more humans. And it doesn't care whether it makes me fall in love with someone who has a suitable personality for my particular temperament or not. It'll just get those chemicals flowing, and it'll do its damnedest to actually get me to have sex with somebody and produce another human being. It doesn't care whether we can live together as a couple or not. It doesn't care at all. It's also possible to be married for a couple of years and then to end up falling in love with someone else. And you might think, oh, well, I'm supposed to be with this other person now because my brain is making me feel this. And again, your brain and your body, it just does not care. It just wants you to breed. And human sexuality, if you're the sort of intellectual person that I am, that really lives for the life of the mind more than anything, sexuality is such a nuisance. Your body produces all this sperm, and then you get all these instincts to go and breed, and you don't want to because you don't want the responsibility. So you just get rid of this excess however you can and move on until it replenishes itself, and then it's the same pattern over and over again, and you've got this to look forward to from puberty right through, I guess, to your 60s or something like that. It's crazy being a human being in a civilized world. You see, in the prehistoric day, it would have been different. It would have been communally raised children where there was no sense of paternity in the sense of one child having a particular father. All the men would have taken an interest in all the children, just as all the men would have went out and hunted for food for the tribe, not for a nuclear family. The nuclear family is a consequence of there just being so many people, and I don't think humankind was meant to live on the planet in these kinds of numbers. I think the great wrong turn for humans was the dawn of agriculture. That's a big subject too, but that's essentially where mankind started to plant itself in one place, to own property, to have workers, and then it became important for a man who had a farm to pass that on to someone else. So this is where paternity became important. So having a wife became important. Essentially having a person as property became important, and that's essentially what marriage is. You can dress it up as this great act of self-giving, but it is as much selfish as it is selfless. It is the mutual ownership of one person with another, contractually and legally binding for your entire life. I don't think that's healthy to own people as property. Anyway, that's my take on marriage. That's why I will never marry. I see my future, the next 3 decades, if I live that long, as a future of singleness and relative happiness. Maybe, if I'm lucky, interspersed with a bit of romance here and there. Maybe not. That's okay too. I think although parenthood is still an option, it's not really something that I feel strongly about. And if I did feel strongly about it, I think I would probably be opting for surrogacy at this point. There's another whole can of worms there, perhaps for another video. Alright folks, take care.